started out
Check.
at the church, and they asked me to show the movies. And so this
Let's
is
just
in
roll.
in the church itself, and this is still one of the churches that people don't use it that way, but it has one door for women to come in and another door for men to come in. And so when we were running the movies, and I was talking about the time that Don and I chased after the loose boat, and I said, and that darn boat did something or other. And afterwards my aunt said to me, would have been better if you hadn't sworn in the church.
Ooh. Boy, I'd have never made it. So we're doing okay. So are you seeing the levels and stuff?
My father was a priest.
I think he's just about to be
He did it
done.
upon occasion. My favorite sermon, of course, I was a kid, is we were talking, I don't remember what lesson we were looking at. This Episcopalian. And he said, so-and-so, found out about hell, and because, and it's as hot as hell in here, and so ends the sermon. And it was the middle of summer.
Yeah.
But he was a little different.
Well, in a way, Elsie was doing just what my father always said to me, that you avoided the appearance of evil. And this, in a way, is a sort of a hypocritical thing, but, get you through a lot of problems. And also have a lie ready is another good.
Have a lie ready.
Let's go ahead and start.
Okay, he's just about to turn that off. Is this a is this a new tape?
No.
Same one?
Now
Oh, so we're gonna run out pretty quick.
No, you said there was plenty on there. Same one you looked at this morning.
But I thought there was only that much.
I think we got enough to roll for a little bit.
Okay.
We'll just
What are we concentrating on this morning?
Well, let's just talk about. Let's focus on that trip and just how it kind of felt to get ready for it, and then just kind of chronologically go through it, if we could.
You don't know what you're saying.
I don't, huh?
You know those wind-up toys
No, that's okay.
that go on forever?
Oh.
Now, are we doing this now? Okay. Well, first we got ready by reading all the literature that we could get a hold of, and talking to a lot of people, and then deciding what to wear, and actually, Elsie didn't much like blue jeans. Again, I think because they had they had a masculine appearance, and she didn't want us to attempt to look as if we were trying to do what all the guys did, and because both of us didn't believe there was that much difference between the sexes in terms of what your interests were and in terms of what your abilities were. And one of our pet peeves was when people would ask us, do you think you can do everything as well as men can? And of course, the answer always was, in terms of strength, that probably we could not. But certainly in terms of endurance, I think we thought we could hold up pretty well. So we made lists and lists of stuff. And I don't remember any great omissions for things that would make us comfortable on the trip. I don't even remember that we were far off on lots of things. People didn't use sunscreen then, and we didn't worry about that. And I don't recall that we even worried greatly about drinking water as we have on this trip, which I think makes a great deal of sense in how well you feel as to whether you're drinking enough. We just drank whenever we felt thirsty, And sometimes we even drank out of our sun helmets when we were on the river. Usually we tried to let the water settle overnight, but that was all that happened to the water. Of course, it was vastly different circumstance then, too, in terms of use of the canyon. So and all the stuff like the plant presses and even newspapers that you use to put plants between in the presses were set up, and we had an awful lot of junk, I thought, to carry. Elsie, I think, did not have a regular bedroll. I had a makeshift one that where you alternate folds of blankets. I think I probably had 3 blankets and slept under whichever layer appealed to you. And I did. The idea of an air mattress appealed to me greatly, and my father and mother sprang for that, and it was so much more bulky than anything that you see now, of course. And all of this stuff got collected in one place or another, and the Department of Botany was very supportive because, after all, 3 of its members were involved, and the department head gave us a great. We went to what we thought was the departmental spring picnic, and it turned out to be in honor of the travelers who were leaving.
Now, it was you and Elzada, and who was the
And
third?
Gene Atkinson was the third one. He was in an anomalous position because he was being paid by the botany department to do actually 16 hours of work a week was what an assistantship involved at that time. But his interest was primarily zoological, so it was a kind of strange situation. And we stacked up all of this stuff and left, as a matter of fact, from the Natural Science Building, and went in Gene's car and drove then on out down to Norm's place first. And he was still working on the boats, and our job then was to sort the stacks of canned food into we had supposedly 2 days provisions in each gunny sack, and Elsie and I did that, and also we labeled the top of the cans in case the labels soaked off. There were a few odd surprises that came up when we opened something that we
better stop our batteries pooping out.
Yeah, let's change tape and bats right now.
Okay.
Okay, do you have another? Okay, so this is the second tape of an oral history interview. This is for the River Runners Oral History Collection, September 15th, 1994. We're in the Grand Canyon, at Blacktail Canyon. We're talking to Lois Jotter Cutter, and present are Lew Steiger, Jeff Robertson, and Karen Underhill, while they're loading the boats down there. If we talk long enough, we're going to get out of any work
so
whatsoever.
hard. Of course, all you guys work pretty much all the time, it seems to me. Every time I look up, somebody's busy doing something. So.
Well, this trip, we were just talking about it. God, we were wanting another day bad. We're going to have a light hit right now.
What's going to happen right there?
Oh, we're getting the sun, so holler if you got a re-white balance or something. And holler if this sun gets too bright in your eyes.
All right. Well,
I will want a white balance when she gets hit with actual sunlight.
Okay. So you get there and the boats aren't ready, and you guys were doing the cans, and Don, and that was Norm and Don?
Norman and Don were busy. When I say they're not ready, they were putting the last touches on it. As I recall, we stayed over at least a couple of days at Mexican Hat and met Norm's mother and father, and greatly admired that lodge that Norm's father had built, which I'm told now has burned down.
Huh.
But then we finally got started in a sort of a caravan and went up through, as I remember, through Bluff and on up to Green River, Utah. And on that section of the trip was where usually older men would come up to us and say, "Do you really know what you're getting into? That's a bad place. X many people have been lost in X many places." And there was even one gentleman who had had too much beer who came over and kissed us both goodbye to our great surprise. And so, and we were pretty, I think, probably flippant about the whole thing, because it seemed like the easiest way to handle being warned that you were probably not going to come back, was what they were saying.
Were Norm and Don pretty reassuring?
I think he was just so busy and so freaked out with all of the things that he was doing that he was unaware of what was going on. And I think usually these approaches came when he was busy doing something and wasn't able to say anything. Excuse me for my runny nose.
Lois, could you just hold your hanky for a second? Just open just a little bit, and I'll. That's fine, right there.
You got it? I don't know what's going to happen in a little bit. I'm going to be squinch-eyed. How much longer? How much more footage do you want?
Well, about 2 or 3 hours. So this sun's really working on you. Let's see, what can we...
Well, at this point, it's all right, but...
You know what we can do, Karen? If you, down there in our big box, I have a little parasol. And if you wouldn't mind, it's in the camera box that on Brian's boat, and it's a little blue parasol. It's about this big, and we can get some shade.
That probably would help, because I know I'll get progressively squinch-eyed.
We'll have to re-white balance then, but
I didn't really expect the sun to come up this.
I didn't.
Fast.
We weren't thinking about it, but
everything takes so much longer.
Well, yeah, it's been really. We've been bemoaning the fact that we don't. What we need is a full day where we don't even go anywhere, where we can just sit down and talk to a bunch of people, because this is getting to be terribly frustrating for us.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Now that's too bright right there, isn't it? Are we rolling? Maybe we should. Oh, I know, the flex fill. Is it up here, or did it go?
I took it back down.
We can.
You want me to shut off?
Yeah.
Where were we?
Well,
we were at Mexican Hat driving up to Green River, Utah.
And these beer-sodden individuals had just kissed you and Elzada
wished
goodbye.
Us good. And I think it was probably Elsie who said first, "Well, if we don't come back, just toss a rose over into the canyon for us." And this really bothered people, I guess again because it sounded too flippant. Anyhow, we got to Green River, and there was a little attention from news people. I don't remember that there was a great mob of people until we got started the next day, and then there was quite a group of people that gathered. I think Don had family there and a girlfriend, and and the Nevills, of course, were there. And when we got into the boats, I wasn't even sure that they were going to float, because I don't think either Elzada or I expressed this opinion, but we didn't know. They'd never been in the water, and it was a comparatively new design. And so I was really quite relieved when I thought all we'd need would be to have one boat sink before we ever really took off. So we got started, and in fact had some of these friends and relatives in the boat with us until we went down to a spot they called the Geyser, 2 or 3 miles, I guess, down the river, and that was the final farewell and the start of the trip. And of course, that whole first stretch down at the confluence was a very quiet there were really some little riffles and things to practice in, and I think we all took turns rowing the boats because Norm perceived no danger, and I had done more rowing than Elsie had, so Norm pretty soon took her off that particular duty, and so we had a good time going down that section, and Norm occasionally lectured us about about being careful, particularly. And my first mistake was to toss a bucket from the boat toward the shore, and it didn't make it and sank, and we didn't ever recover that bucket. So that was the first bad example, number one. And as we went on down toward the confluence, I don't know that most of us felt any more apprehensive until we got just above the place where the Green and the Colorado, or I guess it was called the Grand then, joined to become the Colorado. And you could hear the noise of the first series of rapids. And we knew there were several in a row very shortly after the joining of the two rivers. And that was a sort of not ominous exactly, but we were all pretty serious. And so the four fellows went down to scout the rapids, and Elsie and I sort of poked around by the places where we had tied the boats on the right-hand shore. And Elsie was taking pictures, and I think I was probably just generally milling around, and I heard Don shout, and he came breathlessly running as well as he could over the rocks, and he said, "The hat is loose, we've got to go after it. Come on, grab your life jacket and jump in." And so we did, and as I recall, we picked I don't really remember which of the other two boats we leaped into and started off. We could see the Mexican hat bobbing on ahead of us, riding really right on top of all of the waves. And we thought we probably had gone through one rapid and possibly two when Don said, I'm going to pull over and take a brief rest here, because he was out of breath when he jumped into the boat. And I'm almost sure, well, I'm sure those were the first big rapids that he had run. He'd been on the San Juan, but, and because of the high water, the rapids had coalesced, as it were, and we actually had run, I think, 3 of them in that first thing without recognizing that they were all one big rapid instead of 3. So we went on. I remember bailing furiously with a coffee can, which was, I don't know that we'd really even thought of, we had buckets, but I don't think there were any free in the cockpits of the boat. And I think there were 7 rapids in all, and when we got through that mess and it looked like quiet water ahead, Don pulled over on the left bank, and we didn't see any sign of the boat. It was a big stretch of sand, more extensive than this place that we have where we are here. And finally, way down at the end of it, I thought I saw a little bit of white, and so Don and I progressed down there, and indeed it was the boat, sort of, minor eddy near the shore, and so we pulled it up on shore and probably tied it. Don said the other day that he thought that what he had done was to tie it, the original tie at the confluence, on several willow stems, and that those willow stems had actually been, the water had risen, and so the boat had pulled free from them. I was relieved when he said that because I didn't really remember, and I hoped I hadn't been the one that had tied it. So we decided, or I guess Don decided, that the best thing to do was for him to walk back up on the left side of the river where we were then, and we knew the other people we had left on the right bank of the river. And indeed, Don did start out walking, and I don't remember whether we probably dragged my bedroll was in that boat, so we probably dragged that up to a place where he decided would be a good camp, not too different from where we are here, except that there was only willows in growing in the sand. And then it got dark, and Don went on back up, and when Gene saw the movement across the river, it was getting fairly dark by that time. He was collecting specimens, and he thought for a little while Don was a deer, but fortunately obeyed the rule about not shooting at anything until you really had identified it. But Don was relieved that he didn't get shot at. So then they had the business with one boat of getting the 4 people who were on the wrong side of the river across to the left side. And Norm did that, running across the rapids, which seemed like, at the time when I thought about it, a tremendous feat. But watching you guys handle the boats yesterday, maybe it wasn't as, if you choose your place, I think that's not an impossible sort of a feat. So what happened was that the Norm and Elsie stayed at that particular, Norm and Elsie and Bill Gibson stayed at that particular place overnight, and Don and Gene started back toward me, thinking that I would feel stranded, and also wanting to inform me that everybody was all gathered on the same side of the river and everybody was all right. They got about halfway down. I believe they did have a flashlight, but the rocks were pretty big and it was difficult for them to maneuver. So they stopped and slept as was. And Don had, his pants, of course, were wet and he had no shirt on, so he spent the night. As soon as his legs got slightly warmed up, he'd move the trousers to around his neck, and so it was a pretty uncomfortable situation for him. And they started out again the next morning and got down before the boat did, and I was delighted to see them, but I don't recall being, I felt lonesome there by myself, but not particularly frightened, because I didn't think there was anything that was going to damage me greatly in the area. Certainly I didn't anticipate any other people around, and even then there was no reason to be particularly afraid of them, because nobody was there. Anyone that would penetrate down to that point in the canyon would have to be sort of a hardy soul anyway. So we did have, I don't remember what we did about cooking breakfast or anything. We probably had coffee and hauled out the grape nuts, and that was about it at that particular point. And we had a wonderful reunion when the other people came down, and Norm had a good reason for saying, you see, I said we should all be careful, and so we were reunited and started out again. And the only really bad thing about that whole two bad things about the whole cataract section was that we did come to some rapids that Norm felt had to be lined, and eventually to a place where the hole was right close to all the rocks along the shore where we were. We pretty much kept to the left shore as we went down, and that was really backbreaking work for everyone, because there's one place, and I don't know whether those negatives are available. Elzada did take a couple of pictures, but where we had to pull those 3 boats on, we picked up enough logs to use as skids or rollers or whatever you want to call them, and did, of course, 1 boat at a time, and everybody was working pretty hard. And I remember Norm said, they're just as good as any men on the river, because Elsie was as tall, almost as tall as I, and certainly was used to doing not manual labor, but I think we probably wouldn't have been able to do it if the 2 of us hadn't really pitched in. And of course we portaged all the junk, including a carcass of a deer that Jean had shot on the a little further up the river, and which we did utilize for meat, I think, for only a day, certainly no more than 2 days, because it was
Too hot.
extremely ripe by the time we finally buried it. And that was difficult at that particular point. And I guess I had no regrets about going on the trip, because I remember thinking to myself, well, you got yourself into this, you might as well just carry on through, and the only way to do is to just go on out. We had some discussions during actually I think that bad place took us 2 days to get through, and we had some discussions. I remember Bill and Elsie and I talking at one point about how if something happened to the boats, what we would do, and Bill opted for climbing up and walking out over the desert, and that didn't appeal to me at all. And I thought it'd just be the best thing to work along the shore until I came to some place where there were people. I suppose it would have been height, if anything. But I thought sticking by the water was a better move than trying to climb out without water. And so, fortunately, that was unnecessary. Then the other bad point was going through a rapid, and I think probably Bill, I don't even remember who was rowing the Botany was the name of the 3rd boat, the Wen, the Mexican Hat, and the Botany. And at any rate, Don was in the middle of the river, and we saw the other boat close to the right-hand wall and really going up. It was the wrong place to be, and I don't know exactly why they were over there, whether they misunderstood directions or just didn't move fast enough, and the boat capsized. And there's no problem to pick up. Bill Gibson was in the water and floating along, and Jean had sort of crawled out by the shore at that point. And somebody was talking about hearing rocks move underwater, and this was something that he mentioned when he came up, and he got a little tossed around underneath the water and had a pretty bad cut on one lower leg, and was a little bit maybe disoriented is too strong a word, and Bill certainly was were both happy to be out of the water. And then there was a series of things that have been better described in one of the books, and that is something that I do have a publication that Elzada wrote for the Michigan alumnus, and the title of it was "Danger Can Be Fun," and she goes through a better account of what happened at this point, because here we were four of us with two boats, Elsie and Norm not knowing what had happened to the rest of us downriver someplace. And so we got the boat. Gene was on, that's right, Gene was on top of the boat and had the rope in his hand. And he really didn't rejoin us. We just talked to one another. I was trying to figure out why it was that we went floating down with an upside down boat, and that was it. We never did get it over to shore at that point in the game. And eventually he caught up with Norm and Elsie and they and climbed aboard the Wen, still with the tie rope in his hand. And if you can imagine anything more awkward than trying to go through a rapid under those circumstances, with somebody sitting loose on the bottom of a boat, holding in his hand, although he may have, if he was cinched it around something, I don't know. But it was a very awkward thing, and they couldn't get it landed right. And so they did all this maneuvering and ended by having, maybe Norm thought he could handle the boat, the upside down boat better than Gene could, but at any rate they exchanged positions. So here's Gene and Elsie in the boat, Norm with the other boat, and somehow I guess they were going to get it to shore and they couldn't quite make it. And so they ended with Norm on shore and the other two still towing this dumb boat. And they went through several other rapids in this shape. So we came along, and here's Norm, so we stop and pick him up. And that left four of us in the remaining boat to go down. And as a matter of fact, Don ran the next two rapids, and the rest of us were just passengers. And we finally did all get together again and stayed over, I think, one day drying out equipment. Bill Gibson's camera had been in the hatch of the overturned boat, and unfortunately it did leak to some degree, and the camera and the grape nuts and anything that was in there was pretty well soaked. And this was how my dislike of grape nuts originated, because we spread them out on a rock to dry, but they dried in aggregates like great big marbles. And even when we tried to pound these apart, they still didn't dry out in the center. Of course, they molded. And I don't like grape nuts to this day.
So how they finally get that boat to shore then?
That's why Elsie's first-hand account is better than mine, because we heard this narrative while we were sitting around recouping our spirits and our and I don't really remember the details of that well enough, and I'll see that your group gets
yeah, that'd be great.
a copy. I almost brought it with me, and then I thought that it was I thought that the title was a little hokey, and although it's an entertaining description. Elsie was an extremely entertaining speaker when she went to. I shouldn't say she went on the lecture circuit, but she did give a great many talks, as I did fewer, and to a slightly different sort of a group. So I'll see you get that account, because mine wouldn't be really a first-hand. I don't remember the details of it clearly, but it was wild.
Well, yeah, and was that somehow a point of departure for between Don and Norm? So, because somewhere it seems like at some point in that trip, and if you don't
that
want
was certainly a part of it. I think just as on any river trip, somebody has to be in charge, and certainly in this case, it was Norm. And I think for maybe the first time, he felt that he might have started something that he couldn't control. And at any rate, he did ask Don to take that boat through the rapids.
to take the boat
When the four of us were all together. And it may have been simply that he was fatigued, I don't know. But I think that maybe was one, and they didn't always agree about how to run rapids either. And I think that the fact that the following year when Don went down and he ran everything, to me meant that he had more confidence in his skills than perhaps Norm did at that moment. And Norm was a very decided soul, and I think a leader has to be a leader, but he was abrasive at times.
It's funny, you look at a lot of pressure situations like that, first trips and stuff. The Powell expedition, the same. People get in. When people are under pressure, I think we tend to show the worst sides of ourselves.
That's right. And of course, what happens too, here were all of these situations. We were tired. When we were doing all of this business of the pushing the boats around. Both Don and I, whether it was from drinking unsettled water or something, or just stress, both of us had digestive problems, and certainly Gene had been knocked around. I'm sure his leg hurt him, and he'd been knocked around so that he wasn't his normal self too. And Bill was really morose about his camera. So here we were in that kind of a situation, and then we go out of that part of the camera, no more the canyon, no more rapids to run. A beautiful place, Glen Canyon, but you just drift along, and I think the relief of the pressure makes you do things that you might not otherwise have done, because the four of us did sort of, I don't know that you would call it ganging up, but we made a tight community and excluded Norm and Elzada. And I don't know whether, I don't feel particularly guilty about that, but it was unfortunate. And so we tied up together the two boats and drifted down and ignored the others. And so this was the genesis of I think of Norm calling me a troublemaker. And I think I was not any more so than any of the other three. We were equally culpable, I believe, and equally impatient with Norm.
Karen, I'm a little worried that, are we how are we doing? We got to roll?
Yeah, the rowboats are pulling out now. You can catch Martin before the rope board.
I don't
Who's
want to
it-
be
who's-
left behind.
Who's he with? Maybe we should just wrap this. Maybe we should wrap this thing up, and we'll just have to continue it. Let's just continue this afternoon, because I think we got a little bit more we need to go over.
Well, now is this what you're wanting?
Yeah,
wanting?
this is great.
It's marvelous.
Well,
I've done probably 30 or 40 of these over the course of my lifetime, and you're right up there in the top one.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Rather than being rushed now, I think we're better off to just
Well,
make
and
a
rather
date.
than risking getting people unhappy too.
Okay.